današnji izdaji znanstvenih večera Univerze v Novi Gorici. Današnji gost, profesor Ulrich Schubert, prihaja iz Avstrije, zato mi dovolite, da preskočim na mednarodni jezik znanosti. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Ulrich Schubert, who's our guest today, and he will introduce, I think, a topic that we haven't covered in these 3 years of science evenings, namely material science. Material science is a relatively recent area of science, but in a sense its origins come from primordial ages, where it was important to know whether stone will have sufficient mechanical strength to be used as a tool. And Professor Ulrich Schubert will show us today that there are very intricate connections between functionality of materials and their chemical properties. Professor Schubert started his academic career in 1974, when he obtained his PhD degree in Technical University in Munich, and then he went to Stanford in the United States as a postdoctoral fellow, and continued his academic career. He went through all these necessary steps that are required to become a full professor of inorganic chemistry at the Technical University of Vienna. After postdoctoral research, he went to Würzburg, University of Würzburg, where he stayed 12 years as a professor of chemistry, and he also served as a director of Fraunhofer Institute of Silicate Research. He was also visiting professor at the University of Strasbourg, University of Vilnius, and University of Padua. Professor Schubert is author of numerous scientific papers, and this puts him in a position where he can act also as an important point of reference in important institutions, such as being a member of executive board of Austrian Science Funds, or president of the Austrian Chemical Society, to name a few. He's also a full member of Austrian Academy of Sciences and a fellow of Royal Society of Chemistry, and a member of German Academy of Sciences Leopoldina. Due to his scientific stature, Professor Schubert is also a member of editorial boards in several important chemical journals. And as I said, today we will hear in his lecture the connection between chemistry and material science. Professor Ulrich Schubert, please.
First, to talk to you, what are new materials? Each of you probably has a perception what that could be, but let me share with you some of my thoughts about that. And in the second part, it gets more chemical. So I warn you already, so the second part, I will shifting more and more into chemistry. And in the end, I will show you, the total lecture is about giving you the connection between the development of chemistry and the development of what we call materials, or what we call new materials in our days. So development of tools by using materials accompanies mankind through all stages of the development. So imagine we would be here not in this very beautiful environment, but in the early Stone Age, in a cave, sitting in a cave. And imagine I would be a professor of inorganic chemistry in the Stone Age, and I would come up with this new device. And you would say, you are used to using wooden devices, and you would say, hey, what a clever guy, he has designed this new material, or to be more precise in our language, he has used an existing material, stone, and has shaped that into a device which we can use to hunt or whatever. That are examples from the Stone Age, and basically what they did at this early stages of mankind is using materials which were around, bone, wood, stone, and to shape it. So they did not invent new materials or prepare new materials, but they used a technology to make tools from certain materials which were around. If we jump forward in the development of devices or tools, that's a next big step. So at some point, mankind learned to use mixtures of materials which were around, clay, sand, etc., to shape it, and again develop a new material now to make ceramics, to shape ceramic bodies, to burn it, etc. And then that again was a big leap forward, not to use a single source of materials, not to use just wood or just bone, what was around, but to mix something together, but again to develop a new technology. And I have more or less arbitrarily copied some pictures from the internet, but you know that yourselves that different cultures have developed the same technology at the same time, or more or less at the same time, in Central America, in Africa, etc. So that was something different cultures shared. And the story goes on. Now again, some material which is not around in nature, or not so abundant in nature at least. Sometimes, of course, you find some metallic ores, but to make use of metals, one had to invent, or mankind had to invent, how to make metals from ores. How to reduce, in a chemical language, how to reduce these ores, and to get, by some new technology, metal out of it, and to shape this metal. And you all know that they did not only make useful devices, tools, but they also invented some wonderful things like that, or this disc which represents the sky. Here, the examples I have showed you more or less was development of technologies. So making use of existing compounds or transforming existing compounds in a very simple way, in a simple way from our point of view, of course. In their age, it was not a simple way, it was a big step forward. But to make use of existing compounds or existing materials, and to make new tools out of it. I will not go through all the centuries, of course, but if we look at what is around or how materials develop, we have, of course, the huge group of biomaterials, which we still use in some way or the other, maybe in a slightly modified or in a modified way, but we still use wool, we still use wood, we use natural fibers like cotton, etc. On the other hand, we had in the very beginning of mankind, as I have demonstrated with some examples, devices made of stone, of bone, pottery developed, metals came in at some point, glass was invented, ceramics was invented. We still have that, but in a much better way, in a much more sophisticated way. So today we also use ceramics, of course, but it's not comparable to the ceramics developed some centuries ago. So we are talking about other compositions and so on. At some point, chemistry comes really in. Here you could argue that it's technology development, that people learned to shape things, to make it purer, etc. But at some point, chemistry comes in a sense that materials were invented which are not around in nature, not even in a hidden way, like the metals, which are hidden in a sense that you have to reduce the metallic ore to get the metal. But here some man-made materials come in, which men, or as a chemist, I can say that chemists invented and eventually developed into what you all know, all the uses which are around for polymers, devices, coatings, even fabrics, all that. And now we are, in my opinion, in a stage down here where everything moves together. We are filling up the gaps between inorganic materials, organic polymers, biomaterials. Later on I will talk about what is called inorganic-organic hybrid materials. I will show you that it's a blending of the properties of traditional inorganic materials like ceramics and typically organic materials like organic polymers. On the other side, more and more materials are being developed which are inspired by nature. For example, chemists very successfully are trying to imitate the structure of bone or the structure of wood to make use of the mechanical properties which bone has. Of course, that's not the end, so the story will go on. But what I wanted to show here is that things are merging together, so the approaches are merging together. And if you look at that, that is only possible by more chemistry. Okay, at some point here, chemistry comes in. So today, the materials we have around are no longer, in most cases, no longer materials we just find outside in the forest or in nature. So at some point, chemistry comes in. We have to make the materials before we can do devices and tools out of these materials. So what is new materials? Everybody has a perception of what is new materials. Of course, it could be a new property, it could be a new use. Well, I can twist it around. So let me go back, sorry. So new materials, if you are thinking about new technologies, we need new materials. So your cell phone would not be possible without new materials. The new technology, all the communication would not be possible without new materials. For example, in microelectronics. But I can turn that around as I already did. New materials also enable new technologies. So once chemists or material scientists have invented, have made for the first time new materials, eventually new technologies will emerge, new uses will emerge, and a good example are polymers, for example, or a topic which is coming up more and more is the so-called molecular materials, where molecules are used, the properties of molecules are used to get some certain function. Just one example, plastic solar cells, which are close to being commercialized. Plastic solar cells would not be possible without new materials. So what makes a material new? And what I've listed here is a scientific point of view, a chemical point of view. Of course, you could say, for me, a new material is something where I can do new things. But from a scientific point of view, a chemical point of view, a new materials could, for example, have a new chemical composition. I will talk a little about the so-called hybrid materials, as I mentioned before, where inorganic and organic properties are blended together. It could be the doping of crystalline solids, the deliberate doping of crystalline solids, which the semiconductor industry makes use of that. That gives, in the end, a new composition. New alloys, composites. Composites are materials which are made of two phases. For example, concrete is a very simple example for a composite material. Or I will show you later on some other composite materials. New could also mean that a new morphology comes in. for a given composition. So we have the same chemical composition, the same amount of elements making up this particular compound, but to give it, for example, a different shape. That's the big area of nanomaterials, which is now everywhere. Nanomaterials have the same chemical composition as macromaterials, but the new properties come in by the size, by the shape and by the size. Crystal shaping, crystal engineering is a big topic to grow crystals in a certain direction, which is not the natural shape of a crystal, and to make use of that. Or another topic would be to have non-crystalline materials of the same composition, tailoring porosity, for example. All that gives new properties to a compound and makes, in the end, a new material. And a very, very topical topic is to separate between the properties of a bulk, the bulk of a material, and the surface of a material. So more and more we are learning to control the surface properties of materials and to influence the surface properties of materials and to make use of that. So I will give you one example for these three things, or for the three issues. So new chemical composition. So the polymer age, so to say, started something more than 100 years ago, and the first commercialized polymer was bakelite. So the older ones among us, like my generation, we can remember a lot of devices made of bakelite, everything from telephones to comms to all kinds of devices we had in the household. That's a resin made of two chemicals, phenol and formaldehyde, which are blended together, not blended together, they are chemically reacted to give these resins. So that was developed something like 100 years ago, and named after this scientist Baekeland. And if you are able to read this text, that's a text which could show up today also in an advertising, okay? Upon arriving home, you find a letter from an old friend, blah, blah, blah. And so returning to the drawing room, you join your wife for an evening with a radio concert, and of course the radio is made of bakelite. Should you examine closely, you will discover that the radio apparatus is made of bakelite, and so on. So that's a text which also could show up in modern advertising with some new fancy device which has been developed. So that's a new chemical composition. The second point was a different shape. I want to give you a very simple example. You all know silica, SiO2 in words of chemistry, and the most spectacular form of silica is quartz. If you go to the mountains or to a museum, natural history museum, you find quartz crystals. But the same compositions, exactly the same chemical composition, one silicon, two oxygens, you find in many other ways. You may have fumed silica. If you buy some moisture-sensitive device, you have this little bag where it's saying don't eat that, and in this bag there will be silica to absorb moisture, for example. That's amorphous silica, has a different form, but it's the same chemical composition. Here, small particles, you cannot see the scale here, that's 200 micron scale, so tiny spheres made of silica, which are used, have many uses, for example, as for micro devices, as fillers, etc. Nature also makes silica in wonderful shapes. Here, diatoms are made of, the skeleton of diatoms is pure silica. But compare that shape to that shape. It has a different function, of course, here, because it's the skeleton of some living organism. So it has a completely different function here. Here, quartz has no function. It's aesthetically, of course, but it has no function. Here, it has a totally different function. Here, it's to try some device, for example. Here is this skeleton. Here, very transparent. It's an aerogel, very light body, also made of SiO2. Very light, you can see. It's very transparent. It's very light. It has a density of only something like 0.1 gram per cubic centimeters. So 100 times lighter or 200 times lighter than that. It's also silica, very porous, has different shape. Or you can make coatings of silica, scratch-resistant coatings here for glasses, for example. Again, silica, SiO2, but a totally different function, different properties. Third example, surface, separating the surface properties from the bulk properties. One example which we will hear about in the future, I'm pretty sure about that, is solar cells, so-called Grätzel cells, Swiss scientists who developed these cells. And here, together with other features, what the basics of these cells are is that there are titania nanoparticles. You all know titania as a white pigment, so a white shirt. If you go to the disco and it shines in the UV light, then this UV, this white impression, this flashy impression comes from titania. Here, titania nanoparticles are used as a kind of semiconductor. I will not go into details, but here the surface is modified. So some organic group is attached to the surface. So the bulk properties of titania, which is semiconductor here in this case, is separated from the properties of the surface. So the surface is modified by some organic group and has a different function compared to the bulk of the titania. And altogether gives you a new device, and in the end we will have these solar cells. Okay, now in this second part, I will focus on these so-called inorganic organic hybrid materials, one of many so-called new materials, or many types of new materials. And so what is that? I have already mentioned composite materials, which are made of two macroscopic phases. Concrete is a good example. If you look, you can see with the naked eye, if you look at a crosscut of concrete, that you have different phases. You have this binder, you have little stones in it, etc. That's a typical composite material. Or if you cut through your tennis racket, you shouldn't do that, but if you would do that, you would see that it's a composite material. You will see carbon fibers which are reinforcing the organic polymer. And so, or airplane wings, parts of your car are made of composite materials. So the idea of composite materials is that you take two materials on a macroscopic scale, combine the two materials, and get something new which has different properties to material 1 and material 2, a combination of these properties. And even better, sometimes you not only have a combination of properties, but some synergy between the properties. So one very often gets additional properties, which none of the starting materials alone has. If you transfer this idea to the atomic scale or to the molecular scale, we are talking about hybrid materials. So the idea is to take molecular building blocks of one kind, combine it with molecular building blocks of the other kind, and get some kind of composite materials, but now on a molecular scale. So even with a good microscope, you cannot recognize the molecular building blocks you have put in. But in the end, the idea is the same, to combine different things to get a new property or to get a new quality. So to show that in a different way, and that's in the meantime an expression which has also entered the scientific literature, is Lego chemistry. So the idea of Lego is, as you may remember, that you have different bricks, building blocks, and you put them together, and you get something out. Okay, you start with individual bricks, and you get a tower, for example, here. Okay, and the idea of hybrid materials is very much related. One takes different bricks. So this little guy here has yellow and red and blue bricks, and he puts it together in a very irregular way. I will comment on that in a minute. But anyway, he gets something new out of that. And the idea is very similar. So take chemical building blocks, chemical bricks. There can be inorganic building blocks of different size, different shape, etc., corresponding to the different colors here. One can also take organic building blocks, again, different size, different shape, different chemical composition, and so on. Combine that in a clever way, and to create new materials with properties where the properties of typically organic materials, polymers, and typical inorganic materials are combined, but now on a molecular scale. To give you one example from our own research, so you know magnetic materials, magnets. Usually these are ceramic materials, and you know polymers. They are flexible, can be shaped very easily, etc. And here a combination of both. So what we were doing is to take, a molecular compound, so-called cluster, because we have several metal atoms here. The chemist among you knows this cluster very well. It's a very famous cluster because it has high paramagnetism or superparamagnetism. In more common language, it's very magnetic. To take this cluster, modify the surface of this cluster in a way to have polymerizable groups. Here, these groups allow afterwards to polymerize the whole system. So attach these polymerizable groups to the surface of this cluster, and then do a normal polymerization. And what you get is a polymer which is magnetic. So you can shape it, you can form it like a normal polymer, but the properties your polymer in the end has is a high magnetism, okay? So you can coat things with a magnetic polymer, etc. So here is a relatively simple example, but here we have combined two things, a typical inorganic property, magnetism, with typical organic properties, which is flexibility, easy way of processing, etc. Okay, now how do we link? Now as I warned you already, I'm going more and more into chemistry now. Now a chemical issue. How can we link the organic and the inorganic entities? That's a chemical challenge, so to say. There are several possibilities. What I will show you a few examples first on coordinative interactions or ionic interactions, and later on then covalent interactions, so strong chemical bonds. So the first example, or the first two examples I will show you are so-called metal organic frameworks and other crystalline compounds related to that. So here, one example, I will not go into details, just to show you that it's also a very aesthetical issue. One gets, so what has been done here was to combine, very simply, to combine copper ions with this organic linker. And by doing that in an appropriate way, correct stoichiometric ratio, one gets very porous materials. Here the green polyhedron, which is inscribed, is just to show you the big cavity which is created by creating this framework. But you see, we have lots of organics here. All the white spheres are the organic groups down here, and the blue spheres are the copper atoms, which hold everything together and provide the structure for these frameworks. That is materials which are not yet in use, but they will have, in my opinion, they have a big future. The so-called, as I said, metal organic frameworks. What people dream about is to store gases in these metal organic frameworks. Probably not hydrogen. There was some hope for some time that hydrogen could be stored, which no longer is a big hope. The bigger hope now is to store hydrocarbons, for example, methane or carbon dioxide. And as you see here from the figures I've shown here, that huge volumes of methane in this case can be stored in this material. So if you fill these holes here up with methane, you reach 3/4 of the density of liquid methane, which is a lot. It's still at low temperatures, but these are developments which are in progress. So these metal organic frameworks are only around for something like 15 years, so we are at the beginning of some development, but I'm pretty sure that in the not too distant future, these materials will be used mainly for that purpose, in my opinion. Second, but one can play around with that. Here in this example, that was a zero-dimensional inorganic entity, just a metal atom. But of course, very similar structures can be made by using extended structures, inorganic structures. So here I have copied two examples. In one case, where it's a chain of inorganic, chain-like inorganic structures made of lanthanum ions condensed with each other and connected by the organic groups. And so it's two different representations. So here's a chain of lanthanum ions. Here's another one, just graphically in a different way. Here another one, and in between the organic groups. Or here layers of inorganic compounds, again connected with inorganic groups. So one can play around with the dimensionality, with the chemical composition of both the inorganic and the organic entities which eventually make up these hybrid materials. The other type of organic hybrid materials, and that's the type we are working with, is amorphous networks, and I want to show you just two slides on how we make it, the so-called salt gel processing. What is done here is to form amorphous networks formed by certain chemical reactions, by hydrolysis and condensation reactions. So hydrolysis means that some other group, OR groups here, alkoxide groups or chlorine groups, are replaced by OH groups by reaction of water, and then these groups condense to give network structures. I should point out here that salt gel processing is a very mild process. It's sometimes called chimie douce, soft chemistry, because it's run at room temperature. The reactant is water, so it's a very friendly process to make solid materials. The big issue, or the main issue here, is that we do not get crystalline materials, not ordered networks, so that, as I've shown you for quartz some slides ago, but we get amorphous network, and these amorphous network have certain properties we make use of. The network forming process is very complicated. I want just to impress you with that slide, to show you that the total process, also the chemical formula you can write down, is rather simple. The total process is very complicated. So first we start to attach a few of these building blocks with each other, but at some point the whole thing gets very complicated. One can get polymeric structures, or one can get more globular structures. These polymers coil up to give secondary particles, and the secondary particles again can join together, etc. So it's a network forming process. If you look at each individual step, is actually a rather complicated process. So another advantage of salt gel processing is that because of the mild reaction conditions, room temperature, ambient conditions, is that one can combine organic and inorganic groups in one material, and that's the topic I'm currently talking about. There are several possibilities how this can be done, and the easiest possibility is what is now called class 1 materials, where organic entities are just entrapped in the network of the inorganic compound. So you do your salt gel processing, the network is formed, and while the network is formed, organic compounds are entrapped. That can be dye molecules, that can be even enzymes, whatever you can imagine. So it's a physical trapping of molecules, of particles, etc., in the network. But the combination of both gives you a new property. A subclass of that is that organic polymers can be trapped inside the inorganic network. So in this case, one gets interpenetrating networks, two different networks which interpenetrate each other, which are not connected to each other. And nevertheless, the combination of both would give new properties. So that's relatively close to a composite material up here. The second, so-called class 2 materials, in this case we have strong chemical interactions, so the organic groups are attached to the inorganic network, same for polymers, and that has sometimes certain advantages. Just before I come to an example, to show you what we need. Now we are deeply in chemistry. We need bi-functional molecules. We need molecules which on one hand can be integrated in the inorganic network we form during salt shell processing. We need an organic functionality where we can do polymerization reactions, or we can any other organic property. And these two have to be linked together by some inert spacer. Here two examples, one from silicon chemistry, one from titanium chemistry, but the principle is the same, that we have one entity here or here which can be hydrolyzed, which eventually forms the network, and here another entity which can be polymerized. And both are connected by some chemical group. I won't discuss why is that particular chemical group. Coming back to this issue, bonded to the network or not. Here an example from the Fraunhofer Institute and also for the Institute of New Materials in Saarbrücken. Photochromism, that means switching, for example, if you have a sunglass and you drive your car in the bright sunshine and you enter a tunnel, you would like that your glasses switch from brown to colorless, for example. And if you go out of the tunnel, they should switch back to brown or blue or whatever you prefer. There are many other uses for these photochromic materials. Imagine high-rise building, hot summer day, and you would like that your window would darken automatically to prevent the heat coming in, etc. Many other uses for these materials. So one possibility would be there are several possibilities. One possibility would be to entrap organic molecules which can be switched in the matrix. The disadvantage is that you need a very high dye concentration to get the effect you want to have. That would influence the mechanical stability. You would get a good material, but it would have not so well developed mechanical properties. If you attach the same molecule to the network by means of a very simple chemical modification, by having this group here which eventually becomes part of the network, then one can one can make use of the same property of the organic compound, but get a much higher loading and a much higher mechanical stability of the film. So that's, depending on what you do, two different possibilities or two different approaches you could have. Another example to show you from our own work, corrosion protection in this case for magnesium. Magnesium is more and more used in airplane industry, in car industry, because it's very light. But on the other hand, magnesium is very corrosive, so it's sensible against water and salt, etc. And if you put a piece of untreated magnesium into a sodium chloride solution, after a few hours, one day, it looks like that, so it's completely corroded. But with a coating made by these compounds, by the mixture of these compounds, one gets a very good coating protection, so no corrosion after 24 hours. And you see here again the same approach, network forming reagents, and here a compound where A certain heterocycle is attached which has corrosion inhibiting properties, and having that attached to the network gives you a very good corrosion protection. So here crosscuts, a magnesium alloy, a very thin layer, 2 or 3 micrometers of these protective coatings, and another properties which is difficult to show, but I can say you the other property this coating must have, apart from being corrosion protective, is to allow paint to be attached on the upper layer. So if you have an airplane, you want to have it in red or green or yellow or whatever, depending on the airline, and this paint should adhere to the coating. And this particular coating has all these properties. Now let me switch a few things. The final few remarks I want to make. Where's the future? Where do we want to go with that? So I have shown you that approach, which means take different building blocks and put them together somehow, okay? And that gives you already some good materials, as I've two examples I've shown you, but there are many, many other examples for that around. So basically what we are doing, and that's the state of the art for the hybrid materials, we have a toolbox with many different pieces, and we take them out by chance. Oh no, not so much by chance. We take them out and put them together by chance, okay? Blindfolded. We grab in, put them out, and put them together. That approach, okay? A much better approach, and that could give you much better materials, but that's the future, is to have a master plan, how to put these modules together, how to these building blocks together. So either to put them together according to a master plan, okay, not like the little guy was doing on the other slide, not like that, but according to some deliberate master plan, or to use modules to put them together. As you know, you can buy you can buy a house also, that's the easiest way, but you can build a house in two different ways, either brick by brick, or you can build a house by ready-made pieces and put them together, and that would be that approach. And that's where the future is going, to make materials by design. So just to show you the chemical approach, or one chemical approach, how this can be done. So for example, starting with a very simple precursor, very simple chemical Lego piece, like that. To modify that, one example would be not to have one metal in here, but to attach a second network forming component to this basic building block. Or the other possibility we are following up is to make preformed pieces, modules on a nanoscale, so-called inorganic, or the so-called nano building blocks, NBB, which means that one part of your molecule, of your starting molecule, is pre-arranged to some entity. Here, two examples. Here, kind of cluster of a tiny section of a piece of silica to which organic groups are attached, or here zirconia atoms where organic groups are attached, and to use these nano building blocks to make materials. Just let me skip a few slides because I'm running out of time. So here, some of these nano building blocks clusters, so different shapes, different sizes. Here in this slide, only the inorganic part is shown, how the polyhedra of the central atoms are connected. And around these clusters, as I've already shown in one of the previous slides, we have the organic groups which can be polymerized. And if you do that, and the second option we have is to attach to the cluster core different organic groups to make different reactions, different polymerization reactions. For the chemists among you here, for free radical reactions, polymerizable double bonds or ring opening metathesis polymerization, atom transfer polymerization, etc., depending on how you want to polymerize your organic groups, different clusters. So 2 options to modify the size, the chemical composition of the inorganic core, the inorganic part of your final hybrid material, and the second option to modify the organic shell in terms of the reactions you want to do and the kind of organic network which can be formed. And if one does that to polymerize these clusters, one gets new materials, hybrid materials, because we have an inorganic entity and organic entities. In a very schematic view, an organic polymer chains like an organic polymer, but now interconnected by these inorganic clusters. The polymers we get out here, the appearance of this polymer is the same as normal polymers. So if I would show you a piece of such a polymer, you wouldn't see a difference with the naked eye. So plexiglass, PMMA, doped with these clusters looks like plexiglass. But you would see, so you don't see a difference with the eye. But you would see immediately a difference if you take a match and ignite it. So PMMA, plexiglass, burns very well. It burns very well and it develops soot. If you cross-link that with the cluster, it does not burn. So tiny amounts of cluster prevent burning. I can explain, if you like, later why it does not burn, but just that. And we get many additional properties. We can control the swelling. The thermal stability is better, as I just said. The mechanical properties are improved. And as I have shown you before with this magnetic cluster, we can also incorporate clusters which bring in new properties. Now, what are the conclusions? Let me summarize that in 2 sentences. The conclusions, the first sentence sounds a little negative. I've taken that from an article in Nature. There was a discussion some years ago initiated by Martin Jansen, a solid-state chemist, who was saying one cannot design materials in a simplified manner. He had good arguments for that. And that was a response, so there was a scientific discussion on that, and it was saying during the past century, science developed a limited capability to design materials. So design in a way that to have the chemical composition, the combination of the molecules in a way to achieve certain properties. But we are still too dependent on serendipity, so it's still a little by chance. My answer to that is that, okay? So all material science out there, think a little more about chemistry. We chemists have a lot of possibilities where we can help and where we can try to get out of serendipity and do it in a more deliberate way. The final slide. Thanks first to my group, to the people who give money, the most important money, and especially I should point out FWF, that's the Austrian funding agency for basic research. You have to provide good projects, but you are free to do what you like. So you are not forced to develop something useful. Maybe we can discuss that, what useful means. We do not have to apply it. We can do basic research. Here, as you know, other funding agencies which are not so liberal in terms of spending money, here you have to do something useful, same here. So thanks to all of them, and thank you for coming and for listening.
Thank you, Professor Schubert, for this nice lecture. Please, will you sit down? We could chat a little bit more. And we may continue where you ended with the basic research. I learned that you have, in Austria, you have a special agency that funds only basic research. Could you please tell us a little bit about what you think about the role of basic research today in science, and what's the attitude of Austria towards basic research?
Well, you may have heard already what I was telling you, that in my opinion, basic research is tremendously important. Basic research, I mean research which is oriented towards gaining more knowledge, which is not, I also do applied things, so I will not bring in a wrong focus, so I'm not against applied research, not at all. But we also need to have a knowledge-oriented research to acquire more knowledge about things. Why do we need that? Well, if you look back in scientific history or in history at all, many things have developed by some arbitrary invention. Somebody has found something 20 years ago, 30 years ago, without a certain aim. I can give you an example for my own scientific history, so to say. I did my PhD work in the group of E.O. Fischer in Munich, who got the Nobel Prize many, many years ago, and the Nobel Committee was saying he was getting the Nobel Prize, that was a Nobel Prize for chemists, because it was simply fundamental research. And I was in that group at this time, and he was asked very often, why do you do that? What is it good for? And he was always saying, well, it's nice chemistry, and so. But that's the start of the story. So 2 or 3 years ago, there was another Nobel Prize. One of them was Schrock on metathesis polymerization. Metathesis polymerization is now used everywhere. So many polymers you have around are made by metathesis polymerization. And if you trace that back, how this method making polymers developed, it goes back to that research Fischer was doing some 30 years ago. If he would not have found what is called carbene complexes, metathesis polymerization would not be around, because that was the basic for that. And so that was an example from my own, where I somehow as a bystander participated. But there are many, many examples around where things which were found in physics, in chemistry and so on, many, many, many years later turned out to be useful in an applied sense. And therefore, I think we need basic research. Our society, our Western society, can of course develop for a century or two new things by what has been found 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But if we do not feed in new ideas, new developments, what will we do in 20 years? Or what the younger ones here, what will you do in 20 years if we have eaten up all the knowledge we have acquired many years ago? And that's why we need a continuous stream of new knowledge, basic research. Unfortunately, in Austria, we have an agency which never has enough money, of course, but we have an agency where you get money if you have a good project, which is evaluated by international reviewers, only by international reviewers, and if the reviewer says it's a good project, you will get money. And nobody asks you, can that be applied?
You mentioned the role of young people, but talking to the colleagues all over Europe and even further, we learn that it's becoming extremely difficult to find and motivate young people to choose natural sciences as their profession. Do you have a similar experience, and how do you think this will affect our future?
When I would be really honest, I wouldn't have so much friends left afterwards. No, to be serious. Well, of course, science is a lot of fun, as all of you who are scientists know. It's a lot of fun, but it's not easy. And to become a scientist, to study chemistry, to study physics, to study biology, etc., is hard work in the end. I will not say any names, but there are other areas which are easier, let me put it this way. Or where young people believe that it's easier, and where they believe that you can make more money with that. And the not too distant past has shown that these dreams are not always true. But so science is difficult, and that is known, and all of you who are university teachers know that young people come in and after a year or so they are frustrated because it's hard work, you work the whole day and in the evening you have to learn and so on. So it's not difficult, but it's rewarding because it allows you, in my opinion, it sounds a little pathetic maybe, but you are participating in shaping the future. And the more you bring in as a person, the more you can participate in this process.
So maybe we should try to convey this message to the youngsters that they are needed to shape the future, basically.
Yes, and we have to, in my opinion, we have to develop a positive attitude towards science, starting with children in the kindergarten. I tell you a story from my own children, a negative story. When our son went to the first class at school, so 7 years old, they had to paint, they had to draw a factory, a picture showing a factory, okay? And of course he was drawing chimneys and smoke coming out and so on. So like 7 years old would draw a factory. And then there was, he was hardly able to write. There was a sentence, and the sentence was saying, chemistry destroys our environment, in German. Of course, that was not a sentence coming from me, definitely not. So that was a sentence coming from the teacher, obviously. And that's a very negative example, because this teacher could also have said, chemistry is our future. And we have to bring the teachers to that point that they say this sentence, science is our future, and not the negative things. We have enough negative things, and we should also discuss negative things, of course. But why not try to develop a positive attitude starting in the kindergarten?
Right. Yes. Maybe we should leave the audience some room for questions.
A question about how do you see the future in projecting new materials? Do you think that somebody can come and say, I would like material with this and this property, and in any way you will be able to produce that?
I think so. Not in every case, of course, but in principle I think it's possible. Of course, some properties exclude each other. Some properties exclude it. You cannot combine any property with any other property. But I think so that it should be possible to, in a certain, with certain limitations, that it should be possible. Actually, we are doing that already. Not in the too much sophisticated way as I've shown you, but in principle, solid chemistry, for example, coatings, it's possible to do that already. If you tell me I need a certain hardness, a certain flexibility, I need certain conductivity and everything together, in principle it's already possible to do that. But as I said, not every combination is possible.
I'm interested, which field of industry is the most interested in or different materials at the moment?
That is very difficult to say, because actually in any branch you find these materials, or these, to say the other way around, these materials enter every branch. A lot of in electronics industry, of course, for various purposes. A lot in so whenever you have a surface which where you want to change the properties of the surface, or where you need to protect something. So protecting means corrosion protection, for example, or protection if you have a soft surface, a polymer, for example, and you want to make it hard, or you want to prevent water entering this material, things like that. Think about food wrappings, etc. So whenever you need to protect the surface, and that enters all kinds of areas. Medicine, something which will, in my opinion, will be one of the central issues in material science is biomaterials. In every respect, so implants, artificial bone, artificial tissue, new types of therapy. People are dreaming about that you can, for example, that you can carry drugs by nanoparticles to a specific point in your body. So I think everything which has to do with biological and medical applications in a broader sense, that's a big issue for the future. And of course communication is always a big issue.
I'm interested in what do you think, which is the new material that is most perspective, most special today known?
Maybe I didn't get
It's
your
like
point.
it's the most futuristic, like for now, I don't know how to say. It's the most useful will be in the future.
You mean from today's perspective, what today is
From this material that you know today.
Well, all kinds, as I said, all kinds of coatings, for example, to surface protection, because they are relatively easy to make. Body implants are very often kind of hybrid materials, or sometimes what else? But coatings, surface protection is in the moment. If we talk about today, is the most important issues. And for example, also to give you another example, for biological or medical applications, if you have an implant for artificial hip implant, for example, you want the tissue to be compatible with the surface and to grow onto the surface, to attach to the surface. And that needs, for example, a modification of the surface, that the tissue can grow in and doesn't repel the implant. And in this case, very often these, not very often, but sometimes these hybrid materials are used, where you have a combination by the problem between inorganic material, like the hip implant, and an organic material, the biomaterial in this case. So these interfaces between organic and inorganic.
Thank you.
Or another example which comes to my mind is contact lenses, okay, which are also hybrid materials.
Any other question, maybe? If not, let's thank our speaker again.